When your wife starts stonewalling you, it's easy to start looking for labels. Maybe she's an avoidant. Maybe she's a narcissist. Maybe she's emotionally unavailable. Maybe she's emotionally abusive. And while labels can sometimes make us feel better because they're offering some relief, they can also keep us from seeing what the real issue is. Because labels create the idea that this is just how somebody is, that this is her issue, her past trauma, her problem. And it does make you feel a little bit better in the moment because you can convince yourself that this is just who she is and that you don't have to take it personally. But the problem with this way of thinking is that it often prevents people from actually breaking through the stonewalling because they're so focused on the behavior of it rather than what's actually driving it. And another thing that most people don't realize is that stonewalling doesn't actually always start as stonewalling. It usually starts much earlier and a lot of the signs are missed. It starts with someone trying to communicate and then feeling misunderstood. And then they feel frustrated and then they feel hurt. And then eventually they start feeling emotionally depleted. And eventually they reach a point when they think to themselves, why do I even bother? That's often where stonewalling begins. People don't just stonewall because of past trauma or because they have nothing to say or because they're trying to punish you. They stonewall because they've lost the hope that saying something is going to matter. Now, I'm not saying that every single person that stonewalls is emotionally depleted, but I think it happens a lot more than many people realize. And I think that we neglect to address the fact of how someone reacts when they feel emotionally depleted. And we get so focused on labeling people that we often stop to ask ourselves, did I do anything that could have actually caused this behavior? And what I've seen in coaching my students is that all of these unhealthy reactions usually stem from the exact same root cause. People don't feel loved. It's really that simple. Either they're not receiving love in the way they actually need, or the way they're showing love isn't resonating and being acknowledged and accepted by their partner. And sometimes it's actually both. So before we talk about how to break through the stonewalling, let's take a few steps back and look at what may have been happening before the stonewalling started. So men carry a lot of external pressure. Let's say that you're under a lot of stress. Maybe work's unstable. Maybe you're worried about layoffs. Maybe there's financial pressure. Maybe you're dealing with health concerns. When men are carrying a lot of external pressure without even realizing it's happening, they often start to become emotionally unavailable to their partner. And of course, it's not because they don't care or because they don't love their partner. They're just simply overwhelmed with everything going on around them. So let me give you an example. Let's say they had a really hard, stressful day at work, and then they come home and they see the house is a mess. So they verbalize, wow, this house is a disaster. Now let's say you have two different wives. One wife might be able to acknowledge the house is a mess and have it not bother her. And she might say something like, yeah, I was out doing errands all day. I'll get it taken care of tomorrow. But let's say there's another wife, and when she hears those words, the house is a disaster, she immediately shuts down. Why? Most people answer that question by assigning her a label. She's too sensitive. She's an avoidant. She's difficult. She doesn't like to be called out on her shit. But what if something else is actually happening? What if she's already emotionally depleted? What if she already feels unseen, unheard, disconnected, and underappreciated from you? Suddenly that comment isn't being heard from her as a comment about the house. Instead, it's being heard as criticism. And really, that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people make in relationships. We assume that other people experience our words and our actions in the exact same way that we do. They don't. We all have different emotional needs and different emotional experiences, different perspectives. So what feels harmless to one person can actually be extremely painful to another person. And when one person feels that pain long enough, they start reacting. Sometimes with anger, sometimes with criticism, and sometimes with stonewalling. And this is why, from my experience, I really believe that stonewalling is just another symptom rather than the actual problem. It's the result of something that's been lying underneath. And I'm going to take this one step further because it isn't always just her unmet emotional needs. You may not be getting your emotional needs met either. And this is where I really think a lot of coaches out there are really missing the mark because a lot of relationship advice just focuses on her feelings, her frustrations, her reasons for pulling away. But very few people are stopping and asking, what's actually going on with you? What are you feeling? What were you experiencing? What needs of yours weren't being met? How did you feel if you came home and the house was a disaster and you vocalized it? What was going on beneath the surface of you? Because self-awareness absolutely matters here. If you can't understand yourself and what you're feeling and why you're having certain reactions and why certain things bother you, how on earth are you ever going to understand what she's feeling and she's experiencing? Let's go back to the house example. When you vocalized, this house is a disaster, was that purely from stress? Maybe. Or maybe there was another layer underneath it. Maybe you were feeling unsupported. Maybe you were feeling overwhelmed. Maybe you felt like you were carrying everything on your shoulders. Maybe you felt like you worked really hard and you're dealing with all this crap at work and all you're asking is to come home to a clean, organized house. And maybe that feeling caused you to feel underappreciated. And the point here is if you don't fully understand yourself and what you're feeling, you'll never fully understand what you're actually communicating to her and what she's experiencing. And if you don't understand what you're communicating, you're not going to understand why she's reacting how she's reacting. So the very first step at breaking through stonewalling is looking inwardly at yourself, understanding yourself, understanding what you've been feeling, understanding what might have changed in the relationship before she started shutting down. Then you move to understanding her and trying to understand what she's experiencing. What has she been trying to communicate? What feelings exist in her underneath the stonewalling? Because most men make the mistake of focusing on the branch rather than realizing there's a root that branch is stemming from. The branch is the stonewalling. The branch is the withdrawal. The branch is the silence. The root is what she's feeling underneath it. So let's talk about what you do when she stonewalls. The first thing is you don't immediately pressure her to talk. You don't want to demand answers out of her, and you don't want to try to force conversations. You just say something like, I can see that you're not ready to have this conversation, and I don't want to pressure you. And then you shift your focus to trying to understand what she's actually feeling. Not understanding the situation, not understanding the argument, not understanding the facts, not processing everything logically, understanding the actual feeling. Because from my experience, this is where most men have the most struggles. They think they understand because they understand the situation. They understand the timeline, they understand the argument, they understand why she's upset, but they still don't understand what it felt like to be her. And that's the piece she's looking for, the feeling. The root. Because if she doesn't feel understood at that level, it's very difficult for her to let her guard down and open back up to you. And if you're dealing with a wife who's stonewalling you right now, apply to work with me. We'll work together to get to the root cause of what's behind the stonewalling so you can stop pushing against that wall and start rebuilding the connection that's missing behind it. I really hope this video was helpful, guys. If so, hit it a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos on helping you save your relationship. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and let's really focus on falling back in love.